Family Victory Fellowship's theme for 2024 is around planning. How is planning a part of your life with your walk with God? What if you saw a great benefit in building your own home? How big would you plan it to be? How much material would you need in order to actually build it? How much would that cost? Would you build it yourself, or would you find someone else to build it for you? Once parts of it are built, like the electrical or the plumbing, how would you plan to get the city to inspect it, to get it approved? Where would you build it? Or what if you felt intrigued or you felt inspired to build a ministry for God? How would you decide and plan for the ministry to align to the vision of the church that you attend or are a part of? How many people do you plan on utilizing to make it happen? How much money would it actually cost in order to execute the ministry? And how would you plan to move it from one level to the next? Now, your study of planning with Family Victory Fellowship is going to start in the life of Jeremiah the prophet. We'll look at the children of Israel and Judah and a plan that God had for them during a very dark time in their history. Now, the focus verses that we will be focused on during this time of study is Jeremiah 29 and 11, Proverbs 16 and 1, Proverbs 16 and 9, Proverbs 20, 18, and Proverbs 21 and 5. Now, why are we providing you a background? Because number one, it'll give you a picture of what was actually happening during the history of Israel when God communicated this plan to Jeremiah. Secondly, it'll give you a foundation on which you can deepen your understanding of the Bible as you read it. It's important in that way. It'll give you that launching pad so that the Bible has an impact on your life, the life of your family, your church, and your career. So part of the learning objectives is we're going to give you a picture of what actually happened to Israel and Judah. You see, all of the 12 tribes of Israel went into the promised land without a king. That's a part of their actual history. However, once the children of Israel got into the promised land, once they looked around, they saw other kings and they decided, we want a king just like all of the other nations, and they essentially rejected God as their king. Now, each of the kings that became king were either good or evil. Good meaning that they served God, and evil meaning that they served other gods. And when you have a king who serves God, then it tends to create a society where the people actually serve God and things can be pretty good. However, if the king serves other gods, then the influences of those other gods and those thoughts can create an evil society. So we're going to take a look back in time over Israel, and we're going to take a look at the different kings in the world that Jeremiah lived in when God spoke about this plan. See, we spoke about there came a point in time when Israel decided that they wanted a king like the other nations. And in the process, the very first king they got was King Saul. You can actually see this occur in the book of 1 Samuel, chapters 8, 9, and 10. Now, Saul became king somewhere around 1025 BC. Now, whether the king is good or evil or good and evil is indicated by the color of the bar at the bottom of their name. So you can see that King Saul was evil because at the bottom of his name you can see there is a red bar. Now, his son Ishbosheth was the next king for a short period of time. Now, the Bible doesn't say whether he was a good king or a bad king, so his square is colored gray. Now, the next king is an incredibly famous king named David. David's square is green. Why? Because David is known as the man after God's own heart. He was a good king who served God all of his lifetime. Now, after David came his son Solomon. And you see Solomon's square is yellow. And what does that mean? It means that Solomon started out following God. But at the end of his life, Solomon served many different gods. Now, notice all of these kings served all of the 12 tribes of Israel. But what happens when Solomon begins to follow God, and then at the end of his life, completely serves all the other gods of more than his 600 wives. Now, because Solomon became evil and served other gods, God literally gave 10 of the tribes to Solomon's servant Jeroboam. Now, God did not do this during Solomon's reign, but he did it during the reign of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. But notice, because of the end of the state of Solomon's kingdom, Rehoboam and Jeroboam were evil kings. Now, what do you think about the fact that 10 of the tribes of the 12, 10 out of 12 were given to Jeroboam, and 10 of the 12 tribes were ruled by an evil king? Now, Rehoboam was evil himself, but he only had 2 tribes. So let's take a look at the history of the kings of Israel. Israel is the other 10 tribes that were given to Jeroboam. What do you notice about all of those kings, all the way from Jeroboam to Hoshea at the end? I see that all of the kings, except one, was evil. And even the one that wasn't evil, Jehu, began by being a good king who served God, but in the end ended up being an evil king who served other gods. So what do you think? What do you think the state of a nation is that serves other gods? Its social practices and norms, its political practices, its economic practices and norms. What would it be like to live in that type of a kingdom serving other gods? Now let's look at the kings of Judah. Since it was only 2 tribes. So what do you see happening? Good and evil. For a period of 339 years, from 925 BC to 586 BC. The kings of Israel were so evil for approximately 204 years, from 925 BC to 721 BC approximately, that God allowed the Assyrian kingdom to take Israel and its 10 tribes captive and took them in captivity to Assyria. You can see this in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 27 through 31. Now, if God allowed the 10 tribes of Israel, who were pretty much evil, to be taken into captivity, what do you think he's going to do with the 2 tribes of Judah? Thinking that they weigh between good and evil. As you can see, the 2 tribes of Judah were also carried away into captivity later by the Babylonian kingdom. Does that make sense? What do you think? So this is where Jeremiah comes into the picture. You see, Jeremiah found out when he was a young man that God had created him before he was born to be a prophet. You can find this in Jeremiah chapter number 1. Now, Jeconiah, who is the second to last king, was actually carried into captivity along with his officials, along with his craftsmen and his smiths. Craftsmen and smiths make idols. They were carried into Babylon. You can read about that in Jeremiah, the 24th chapter. Now, God tells Jeremiah to place a wooden yoke around his neck. This is after Jeconiah is actually taken along with his officials into Babylon. And God tells Jeremiah to send a message to a certain set of kings to tell them that the king of Babylon will come to take their land. And it is best for those kings to actually serve the king of Babylon, or else there will not be good consequences for the kings. Those kings are the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of Tyre, the king of Sidon, and also the king of Judah, Zedekiah. Jeremiah is also told by God to tell the kings that there will be false prophets that will speak opposite of Jeremiah and say, oh no. What Jeremiah says is not really going to happen. Don't listen to Jeremiah. Peace is coming. Now, as Jeremiah is delivering his message to Judah, there comes another prophet named Hananiah. And Hananiah, that false prophet, tells the priest and the king and the others in the temple of God that the yoke around the neck of the children of Judah put on them by the king of Babylon will be broken in 2 years. And he also tells this in the presence of Jeremiah. And this is where you begin your study. When this event occurs in a dark time in the history of Israel. Now, the focus verse here is Jeremiah 29 and 11. Now, this is a dark time. However, God speaks something wonderful about a plan during these dark times. That's where your study begins. The study will also go back to King Solomon, because King Solomon wrote Proverbs about planning. It makes sense to do this because he was the wisest ruler given wisdom by God in order to rule the people of God. And of course, he was attempting to teach his son, who would later become king. And also Solomon's wise advice would be excellent advice for kings who would be planning, and for yourself who might be planning with respect to God. So hopefully this provides you a background before you actually begin your study. Remember, the theme for 2024 is around planning. And how do you incorporate planning? How does God incorporate planning in your life? Let's see what you learn, and we look forward to great things actually changing in your lives and in the lives of those who you love.